Okay, everyone's doing another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today I have another great Omega for you. A nice little find. This one actually is a JDM model. But a little bit about Omega. They were founded back in 1848. They are, of course, Swiss-made and now part of the Swatch Group's luxury tier. Although they were one of the founding members of the Swatch Group along with Tissot. And basically, Omega and Tissot's merging was a precursor to what eventually came to be known as the Swatch Group. So I'd say their history is a touch more pure than the other brands within the group that were, more so bus riders versus bus drivers, to use that NBA analogy. Now, when it comes to the type of watch, this is, of course, a chronograph. Some key characteristics in design language you're looking for. Chrono, of course, you're going to see some external pushers to activate timing functions. You'll see multiple subdials to measure elapsed time, often featuring additional scales dependent on the subgenre. Now, in terms of the watch, of course, this is a Speedmaster, known as the Speedmaster Date. This is a Japanese domestic model only unit, and essentially it's just really cool, speedy from the 1990s. And the 90s were a lot longer, farther back than you might think. So this is straight up, at this point, is pretty much new vintage. You can get this from Belmont Watches, who actually lent this piece into the channel for $21.50. Yes, guys, a Speedmaster. Essentially, this is, I would compare this to, let's say, the Speedmaster Reduced that you can get internationally, but this is actually a lot better for a couple of reasons we're going to cover. Mainly, it has a better movement because this is using the Omega 1155, which is based off of the 7750 ETA Valjoux versus the movement that's inside of the traditional Speedy Reduced, which actually is more of a module movement based off of the 2892. So with all that said, well, 2894 technically, if we count the module that's put on top of it, that turns into a chronograph. So with all that said, long intro, so let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, another big shout out to Belmont Watches, and this thing is a real beauty. In terms of the size, this is a really killer size. So not only is the scale very nice in terms of the size, but the actual proportions are beautiful, and it kind of makes you not realize really just how petite this is, because it does have an 18mm lug, which normally turns me off, but on this piece I don't really mind it at all, especially now that this bracelet style has absolutely come back into style thanks to the most recent Moonwatch. Now, the case diameter is 38.5 with a 13.5mm thickness and a 49.4mm lug to lug, which makes it very, very wearable. Although I do have the wrist to pull off a Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch at 42mm, I have to say this scale is really to my liking. I think it wears and looks really, really nice. Now, the crystal is a nice double dome sapphire, which is fantastic. We'll get a close look there. So even at very harsh angles, you can see, since it's curved on the outer and under portion of the crystal, it's going to be very, very legible even at harsh angles. Of course, let's let this run. There you go. We do have a fixed polished stainless steel tachymeter bezel, which is great. Also a push-pull crown, which is actually very interesting. Take a look at that crown. Look at the shape on it. Very, very cool. And then, of course, polished pushers there. And then, although you can't see it, well, again, the movement inside is the 1155, which is based off the 7750. So 44-hour power reserve beats at 4 hertz. But most importantly, it actually, again, is an integrated movement versus one that's using a module. So very nice from that perspective. This one is actually recently it was recently serviced and is running like +1 second a day. So this is a real gem from that perspective. Of course, the outside looks really great and aged, has a story to it, so it's not something you have to worry about wearing. You don't have to worry about that first scuff because it's got plenty of them, but not in a way that makes it seem like the watch has been abused. It just looks its age, which is age appropriate in this case. So the case back is solid and stamped. The dial is matte black with these cool pale silver subdials, which I think visually can render as white, you could say, and you could call this like a reverse panda style. Also, of course, the full printed indices there, and you're getting tritium lume with this nice natural patina, a warm tint to it that looks really great. And again, very natural. It doesn't look, overly yellow or orange or mustardy. It just looks like tritium that's aged after all these years. So I definitely am a fan of that. In terms of water resistance, I don't even know. Like, I couldn't find anything on the water resistance, so I can't say. So I didn't give this a rinse or anything under the sink, which it could probably have used, honestly, because I don't want to mess with the water resistance on that. So sorry if it looks a little smudgy. The lugs are 18 millimeters, like I mentioned. Everything is solid in terms of the end link, and the links themselves are solid. It appears to have, I'd say it looks like pin and collar. I haven't swapped these out or anything. And then, of course, stamped friction clasp. You get quite a bit of micro adjust there. And of course, on my larger wrist, I did have to kind of really space everything out to the maximum. But this one on my wrist actually looks really good. So let's go ahead and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, it actually wears really well. Even if I get it up to the lens here, it's going to appear a little bit more oversized. It is still a little tight. I would love to get I think it comes with 2 extra links. I'd love to have it with those 2 extra links to make this fit a little nicer, but you know what? Does the job. We'll tighten this up so you guys can get a more detailed look while still keeping a nice true aspect ratio of how it would appear on your own wrist. And you can see this thing wears really beautifully. Again, the 18 millimeter lug, I was expecting that to throw me off. Honestly, I wasn't expecting it, because when I looked at this, it appeared, I thought it was just going to be a 20 millimeter lug, but it's just, it doesn't look overly small or petite or dainty. I think this actually looks quite good, again, even on my larger wrist, and I know I can pull off the larger sizes, but I do like the look of this, honestly. And if I had the extra money right now, this is a steal at right around $2,000, $2,150. So very cool, guys. Again, kind of new vintage class. I really do dig this. So let's go ahead and get it off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots. We'll see what's left in the tritium, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, and as you can see, this is genuine tritium dying down. So let's hit it with the black light there. Camera will focus. You can see that's where it is. Fading, going. So this is legit. So the nice thing is, this isn't, some Franken dial or anything like that that's been touched up. So that's kind of cool. So there's always a silver lining there. But one thing I always like to work in is a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of the building, maybe walking underneath an overhang, or hanging out underneath the shade of a tree, or just spending some time in your favorite automobile. So it is nice to see what these colors, finishes, and textures render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting that would typically expose any type of production defects. But here you're just going to see it exposing some of that wear. And this is a well-worn watch, and it's priced accordingly. Well, I will say, I think that this is absolutely a collector's piece, especially with that JDM. I'm big into Japanese domestic market, whether it be cars, watches. There's just something that's kind of fun and special about that. Even for a Swiss watch, I think that does add a little bit of collectability and a little bit of fun, especially when you do have something that some people might recognize as a reduced, and then they find out, oh, this is actually kind of the cooler JDM version of it, right? So I don't know. I dig that, and I really dig this watch. And again, if I had the extra change knocking around in my pocket, I would definitely get into this. I think I would probably put it on a strap. Just because of the small size. I bet this would look killer on a NATO, 18 millimeter NATO. I mean, ooh, that'd be nice with the hardware. It might help give it a little bit more visual punch, which would be really cool, guys. But for me, closing thoughts on the wrist wears very, very well. Even on my larger 7.5-inch wrist. In terms of model variants, you know, there's tons of different speedy variations, but this one would be, you know, I'd say most closely matched to something like the reduced, and then while also having a distinct advantage in terms of the movement department, you know, not being module based. So I think that's really cool. And then in terms of comparable models, you know, there are endless vintage references out there, so it's tough to compare this to anything else out there, especially when you think about how iconic this is. So for me, guys, bottom line, this is absolutely great for smaller wrists while still being quite wearable for larger ones. And then, of course, it's an Omega at the end of the day. It's a Speedmaster. So if, you know, this is the easiest and maybe the best way to get into, you know, your Speedy Tuesday hashtags on Instagram is to have something like this that really tells a story. And man, just looking at it, it's beautiful, right? Like it has just a certain tint about it, and it just is everything that even some of the modern reissues try to capture. It just has that charm. I mean, there's just a certain softness to the way the light reflects off of it, the way the finishing is, the lightness, the scale, you know, in terms of the sizing before the big watches were really taking over, and Panerai kind of made 45 millimeters and up cool. There was stuff like this at about 38.5. I think some people measure it to a 38 millimeters. Some measure it at 39. I got 38.5 on my caliber. So with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.